started to put in my application, and then I had a meltdown and backed out.
Oh, really?
I can't do it.
I hear you.
Yeah. She's like, it's like an abusive relationship. I'm like, it is. It is. When I watch the news at night and I see all the things that went in, I'm like, oh, Lord, our team is really getting it right now. Like, I think like that, or I think, oh, man, I wish I was there to help. You know what I mean? Like, I would see all that and be like, I miss it.
It's a
I know I
disease.
would miss it.
It's a disease. It really is. It's kind of crazy.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Now, you may have seen this title and thought to yourself, what in the world does being a duck have to do with being an ER nurse? And if you haven't heard the analogy of the duck, I'm going to fill you in on something that I think is pretty apropos. If you've ever watched a duck swim on a pond, you'll see that they look very graceful. Everything looks very peaceful. And they're just floating across the water like they don't have a care in the world. But if you look just beneath the surface, you'll see that their little duck feet are paddling just as hard as they can to keep moving in the water. Now, as an emergency nurse, we have to be the duck. The little duck feet of our mind can be going 100 miles an hour, but what the patient, what the family member should see is just that smooth sailing. Now, don't think your peers don't have their little duck feet going too. Oftentimes, the calmest nurse in the room is the one who's the most worried about the patient. But again, we want the patients, we want the family members, we want our peers to see that calm, cool, collected ER nurse that's in control of the situation. So that's what you always need to be, the duck. My guest today brought up that analogy, which made me want to share that with you. My guest today is a longtime emergency nurse, a mom of 2, and used to be one of my favorite nurses to work with, even if she did have eye rolling down to a science. My guest today is Amanda Sandoval. Enjoy the episode.
I'm Amanda Sandoval. I've been a emergency department nurse for 10 years, and I am a mother of 2 children. That's pretty much it. Just mother life and ER nursing life.
That'll keep you busy.
Yes, very busy.
So, Amanda, how did you decide to get into nursing? What made you decide to become a nurse?
I've always been interested in medicine. Even in high school, I would take kind of the extra prereq classes for anatomy and physiology, and it's just always something that I had interest in. I always wanted to be in the middle of all the action and just interested in the human body and, how it functions.
Gotcha. And at what point in your career were you like, okay, I made the right choice. This is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing?
I think that happened as soon as I got into the ER. I did have to spend a year on a med-surg unit when I graduated. My first week in the ER, I was on nights, and it was just this environment of constant action, constant life-saving measures, even to the smallest degree. I was just so fascinated by the environment of it, and I knew that I was in the right place.
You knew. Now, how did you know you weren't like? Did you like med surg, or what was that experience like?
Med surg was a good place to start because it gave me the basic principles of what kind of a nurse I wanted to be, and also the kind of nurse that I didn't want to be. It was a mix of different personalities, and but it was the basics of nursing. IV starts, basic things to look out for, things that could be life-threatening, things that are normal. I mean, it was just a good place to start, but it definitely wasn't where I wanted to be. I knew that I needed something a little bit more intense and fast-paced.
Gotcha.
I started in med-surg because it's what I had to do in order to get to the ER.
Yeah. Yep. For a lot of folks, that's the stepping stone. Did you do the residency? You did the residency, didn't you?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
I did not.
I thought you did. Oh, okay.
No, I didn't want a chance being stuck on a floor that I didn't want to be on because of staffing. I didn't know if I was going to be at the mercy of the residency program to be placed where I didn't want to be.
Yeah. Makes
So
sense.
I didn't want to take that chance.
Makes sense. Tell me about a patient who changed the way you practice.
I think it would have to be this one patient in particular, and I had seen her in and out of the ER multiple times. She was one of our regulars weekly, but over a course of years. It was actually her and her husband. They would come in as a couple, and they both had some severe alcohol problems, as well as a history of some IBDA and some of the chronic diseases that went with that, some Hep C and, heart problems. And they were always in and out, mostly because they were intoxicated or because they were legitimately sick. Like, he would have a lot of chest pain and she would have a lot of abdominal pain. These two drove me crazy. Every time I'd see them, I would immediately have negative thoughts about why they were there. I would be very judgmental. I would purposefully not acknowledge their complaints because I felt like they were full of it. They wanted their drugs and they wanted their sack lunch and they wanted to rest and then they wanted to leave and start the cycle over again. So I had this preconceived notion of who these people were. One day I finally asked the husband, what is going on with you and your wife? Why are you guys doing this? Why do you waste the ER's time? Why do you allow each other to do this? And for once, I kind of got this very sad look from him and this very genuine look. And he told me, my wife was very severely abused by her father when she was a child. And she has had a very difficult life, even into adulthood, and it made her want to drink. And he said that his home life was terrible. He was abused by his father, and he lost people very close to him. I think 2 of his children had died, and his life just spiraled. So when he met his wife, they kind of fell into each other and fell into each other's diseases, and both of their crutches, which was alcohol and drugs.
Yeah.
And that's how they supported each other, and that's how they learned how to survive through their difficulty.
Wow.
And so it was honest and it was blunt, and it made me feel like a jerk. I just realized that I had no idea what these people had lived through and why they do what they do.
Wow.
And I felt really bad. I felt like I judged them, and I did. I judged them. But when I got to know them, and therefore after they started coming in, the same amount that they did, I would approach them differently, and I found myself being a lot kinder and a lot more understanding, and they changed. Their demeanor changed. They, instead of coming in hostile and defensive, they'd come in and be like, hey, it's cold out and, we have nowhere to go. Can you just give us this one sandwich and we'll be on our way? And I mean, most people or administrations, hospitals, they frown upon that because it's not obviously a shelter. It's not we're not there to divvy out food to the community.
Yep.
But these people were here, and they're going to be here.
Yeah.
They're going to check in for bogus reasons just to get these things, you know? So I think just their approach changed, and so did mine. When they would check in with his chest pain and her abdominal pain, we worked them up. You do what you have to do to, make sure there wasn't a medical emergency, regardless of what was going on. But over time, their ailments did get worse. I mean, he started actually having MIs, and she started getting really bad ascites, and she went into renal failure, and she died eventually.
Holy cow.
And so I haven't seen him since, and I've been waiting to see him so I can give him my condolences and just, I'll just give him some kind words, because I can't imagine how much more harder his struggle has gotten since losing her.
Holy cow. It's easy to kind of prejudge those people and be like, oh God, here's Bob again. Jeez Louise. And then you realize that like they legit have a pretty bad life. They're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not in a good spot. They're usually, they do need care. And then here's the thing is they do get sick. They do get sick, and they can be your sleeper, and all of a sudden be like, oh, we didn't scan Bob this time, and he has a stroke. Holy smokes.
Exactly. That, yeah. We've had that a couple times, and there's another patient, I won't go into that, but kind of the same situation, the exact same situation. So it happens frequently where people just tug at your heartstrings a little bit, and it makes you a lot more sympathetic to their problems.
For sure. It makes it, I don't know, it changes you. And I think once, I remember, being casual pool in the ER, and as a casual pool guy, they're like, well, we're going to throw you where no one wants to go. So, oftentimes I'd go work in MAC, and I'd be like, that's fine. I can deal with that. I can deal with this. This is not a big deal. Like, I can take care of these people just fine, and give them reasonable care, and try to be as kind to them as I can.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, I think no matter what, everybody and anybody just needs love and some sort of acknowledgement that they are important. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to, fall into their excessive needs. But people just need acknowledgement. They need to know that they're important on some level. Everybody needs that, no matter what.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy how those patients, but, and here's the thing, like, the hard part is, like, probably after you confront this person kind of with a little bit of anger, going, geez, why are you here? And then you're like, oh, geez, now I feel like a jerk.
Oh yeah, it was definitely not a what's going on, sir. It was a what is your problem approach.
Yeah.
And it was wrong, but I don't know if that was the demeanor that finally made him come out and say it, because they don't talk about these things every day. Nobody wants to admit that they were abused.
No.
Or that they have this addiction because they just can't cope. Like, nobody wants to say that.
Yeah. No, it's kind of crazy. So.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first error, either your med error or your first procedural error. A time where you were like, the first time where you're like, oh geez, I just did something wrong.
One that I can think of was, I think it was I'd have to say it was an error in which I became complacent, and I didn't place more accountability on the team. I kind of internalized the problem as my own.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a really awful situation.
What happened?
Well, I was in trauma, and I had this young mother who was in a car accident, and she was about, I want to say, maybe 36 weeks pregnant.
Okay.
And she was in an accident, and she came into the trauma room. OB was there, our ER docs were there, and they examined her, did the ultrasound, did the exam, and determined that she was fine, and that she could, just hang tight. We'll get her up to OB whenever she's cleared by trauma, and she just hang down here in the ER. She's not critical. She's good to go. So I took that. I was like, okay, well, we'll just hang on to her. I gave her some Tylenol because she was having a little bit of discomfort. After all, her ultrasound had been negative. So, okay, well, we'll just hang on to her. I gave her Tylenol. She started to complain of, just like the same abdominal aching, I called the team down and said, hey, she's having this discomfort. What do I do? And they said, just give her some more Tylenol, reposition her a little bit. So I did that. And I kind of just left her in the trauma bay, and I didn't leave her, but I didn't push for her to be moved upstairs to OB.
Yeah.
I didn't push for it. And so she ended up, the cramping got worse. OB finally came down, and within moments they rushed her to labor and delivery. Well, it turns out she had a small abruption that they didn't notice on the ultrasound. And so she just ended up abrupting fully.
Holy cow.
The baby had to be delivered. And so for me, I felt like that mistake was not being more proactive in, yes, I gave her Tylenol, but she's still uncomfortable. Somebody needs to take her. Somebody needs to see her. I think I didn't push for her enough. And so I've kind of always had guilt about that, just not being more proactive. I felt like that was a mistake.
I think I remember this patient.
You do. Yes, you were my supervisor.
I think I was going to say, I think I remember this patient. I remember that she looked incredibly stable. She looked fine, and her vital signs were fantastic. But I remember that when they originally brought her into trauma, we were kind of like, okay, she looks too good to be in trauma. But the medic, and I'll never forget this. I've told this story a few times. The medic was like, but you guys didn't see the car. Like, you didn't see the car, and you didn't see how bad the car was. And holy smokes, like, she should be in worse shape than she is.
Wow.
And I've given that example a couple times. Because if it's the same one, I'm pretty sure it was. So
yeah,
she looked fine.
Right, she did, and I also don't think we give enough credit to EMS. I feel like we don't take into accountability what their view is on things, what they actually see, what they experience in the field.
Yeah.
Because that's so true.
Yeah.
Maybe things would have been different if we would have seen the vehicle.
Yeah.
We would have seen the mechanism.
Yeah. And if I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, and I think I am, they took a picture of the vehicle, and the vehicle was in pretty bad shape.
Wow.
And it was an experienced medic who was like, no, really, like, she needs to be in the trauma room. And we were kind of like, well, all right, sure.
Yeah.
So, holy cow.
Yeah, I often think of her. I think about the baby, but I can tell you that ever since then, anytime we get a pregnant patient that's been in trauma, I am on them like nobody's business. I am on OB, and I am pushing for that patient to get up to labor and delivery for constant monitoring.
Well,
continuous monitoring.
I always kind of laughed because we always had a TOCO in the emergency department in the trauma room, but like, nobody's qualified to. I mean, we're barely qualified to put it on, let alone monitor it.
Monitor it. Yeah, we don't get training in.
We don't get training in that.
Accelerations, decelerations, variability. We don't get that specific training.
No, not at all. And the hospital where I work now, they have an OB unit, and like, they'll just look over at the screen. They'll be like, oh yeah, this isn't going well. And I'm like going, I see a squiggly line.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, Kevin, it's so much more than that. But that's what they're trained to do. So,
yeah.
Interesting. That's a tough case there, Amanda.
It is.
That's a tough case. So,
I think about it often.
I bet you do. And it's one of those. I always joke that the life of an emergency nurse is thousands of patients you'll never remember and 100 patients that you'll never forget.
Yeah.
So.
It definitely a lot of things stay with you, and a lot of things are just the everyday patient, and things that are the worst of the worst for the patient themselves and their families. And you're like, you're the third case today. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It becomes routine, as it shouldn't, but it does.
Yeah, I hear they are having like this medical emergency that's going to change their life, and for us, it's just like, oh, it's Tuesday. It's like, it's just not a big deal. And we end up kind of warped. We end up kind of warped with that because we see stuff that people just aren't meant to see.
Right.
We see stuff that people just aren't meant to see, and we see human nature at its worst. But we also see amazing things with human nature at its best too. So, you hope that the balance is there and that it kind of tips the scales towards the good, not the bad. Because it makes it easier to get up and go to work every day. So. Yeah.
And I think on the other side of that coin, we also have the opportunity to really impact people and make a positive difference.
Yep.
Even in the worst of the situations, I think we are key in how they're going to deal with these things long term.
Yep.
Because they're not going to remember. They'll forget about the pain. Yeah, this hurt a whole lot, but they'll forget about the pain. What they're not going to forget about is the people who were so kind and who really went out of their way to help them through this situation.
Yeah, for sure.
They remember those things.
Yeah.
And how people make you feel. You remember that most of all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Good and bad.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because no one, in the entire time I've been a supervisor, nobody ever calls and says, man, she just doesn't know how to start IVs, or, she just doesn't know how to do this or doesn't know how to do that. It's always about the attitude. It's always about how you make people feel every single time.
Yeah.
So,
oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a heavy one. Holy smokes.
It is. I'm sorry, Kevin. You asked.
That's good. No. What's the best advice a nurse mentor ever gave you?
A co-member or a coworker?
A mentor or a coworker.
Oh, a mentor.
Either one.
A mentor.
We'll ask both. So tell me the best advice a mentor gave you, and then tell me the best advice a coworker gave you.
The best advice, what's coming to mind, and I repeat this all the time, that a coworker gave me was actually a senior tech in trauma when I was a new nurse in trauma. And it was crazy. We had all the bays full. It was just wild, as you know it can be. And I was starting to panic a little bit. And he told me, Amanda, he grabbed my shoulders and he says, you have to be the duck. And I was like, what is the duck? And he says, you know how ducks just chill on top of the water? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, under the water, their little feet are going 1,000 miles a minute. He's like, but they're getting things done. They're getting where they need to go. He's like, you need to be the duck. He's like, work, but don't panic. Just hang tight for a second, but just work. And I'm like, okay. That was the best advice. I still use that. I still use it. Like, get moving, do what you need to do, but you don't need to frazzle.
It's good advice.
Get your work done.
It's good advice.
Yes.
I don't know how many. I don't know who gave you that advice, but I've given that advice to, I don't know, probably 100 EMS students when I was an EMS instructor.
Well, that tech was
right.
a medic, so that's probably where it came from.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Because it's true. I mean, that's got to be the emergency nurse. The emergency nurse has to be like the place is falling apart and everything's crazy, and the emergency nurse is going, no, we're cool. We got this. Just got to do a few things.
Yeah. So we're all right.
Yeah. And you were always good at that. You were always good at being like, no, we're cool. We got this. We're gonna, we got some stuff to do. We're gonna be busy, but we got this. So, what about a mentor? What's the best advice a mentor ever gave you?
I would have to say it was one of our charge nurses, and it was a particularly bad day in trauma, I remember, and it was just starting to get really, really heavy back there.
Mm-hmm.
And the best advice she gave me was, I know this is really difficult and we want to mourn appropriately, but the person in the bay right next to you is still alive and still needs you.
Wow.
So, it's kind of one of those, it's unfortunate, but you have to put the major feelings aside for just a moment. Not bury them and not forget about them, because that's unhealthy. But there's still, for every patient that is dying or has died, somebody next door still needs you to be your best. Yeah. And they still need you to be 100%.
Yeah.
So that was just something I think about all the time.
Huh. That's hard. It's hard to do.
It is. It is, but it's so true. It's so true.
Just kind of stuff everything down and be like, and then go on to the next person with a smile and be like, okay, here we go. Here's a brand new patient.
Yeah.
How do you deal with patients when they die? Like, how do you, like, what's your process, or what is your thought process, or what goes through your head, or how do you go home and be a clean slate? If that's even possible, I don't even know.
Right. Well, for me, during the time, you got your head in the game, you're doing what you need to do to try to help this person live. But when that doesn't happen, we usually try to take a couple moments of silence, to think about this person. And for me, I do have faith and I do have religion, and I pray for that person. I pray for their soul, and I pray for the team that worked tirelessly on them, and I pray for their family. For me, that helps.
Nice.
That's how I find comfort. So that's what I do. My husband is also firefighter, EMS, paramedic. So I find a lot of comfort in talking to him about, my day and kind of what happened. And he's a good ear.
Yeah.
I get it off my chest. We discuss it, and I'm done. It's done.
Good.
And I know it sounds callous, like to forget about it and to be done. And, well, this really sucks, but hey, my kids need a bath tonight, or we need to get ready for tomorrow, and
right.
I need to help with dinner,
right.
But it's life.
Yeah. It's like, no matter how stressful your shift was, your kids are still going to want your attention when you get home.
Right. But that's how I cope. By discussing it and, sharing it with somebody who understands. Yeah. I don't know what I would do if I had a husband who didn't understand.
Yeah, no, it helps. And well, my wife's not in medicine. She certainly gets it. Like, she understands. So,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's hard because not everybody does. So.
Yeah.
So every now and then when you meet new people and you tell them you're an emergency nurse, and they always say, "What's the worst thing you've ever seen?" And they don't
always.
They don't really want to know that, because they want, they don't need to have the ghosts that we have of
right.
What are the worst, it's like the worst things I've seen would keep you up at night, because it's kept me up at night. They always want just a story. Do you have a go-to story that you tell?
Go-to story?
Like your go-to, here, let me tell you a quick little ER story so you'll leave me alone.
Well, like you said, it's like one of those things that you don't want to give the worst, because it's, it's awful.
Yeah.
When people ask me that, I usually talk about a patient that I had who did a lot of self-harm, and he one day, keep in mind, he's very much alive and well for intensive purposes, but he had a psychiatric illness, and he decided that he wanted to dismember himself. So he tied himself off with a belt. Well, EMS came to get him, and he was, "Hey guys, I did this. I want to take you to a hospital so I don't bleed to death." He didn't want to die.
Holy cow.
And so the team was like, "What the heck?" And of course they couldn't put it back on. They just did the revised amputation care thing, but
yeah.
He lived. He went to a psychiatric facility, but he was just very matter of fact and chill.
That's
he did a good job.
That's
Surgery was like,
crazy.
"This is actually pretty clean up. You wouldn't have to do very much."
That's crazy. Who does that? What was he thinking?
He wasn't.
He must have been mentally ill. He must have been mentally ill. It's
amazing job at not bleeding to death.
Yeah.
If there is a good job to be done about that.
Holy cow. That's crazy.
It's awful.
What advice would you give a brand new emergency nurse? You probably get a chance to precept all the time. What do you tell the people you're precepting?
Focus on the big picture. I mean, the devil is in the details with medications and care, but take a step back and just really visualize what you're doing.
Yeah.
How what you're doing affects even the smallest facet of this person's life or your team's life.
Yeah.
Just take a step back. It's busy, it's crazy, it's wild, but take a second and look around sometimes.
Yeah. It's sometimes hard to do.
Yeah, it is. You get sucked into the craziness and, triaging what's most important and what can wait. And I mean, it gets wild. Sometimes you need to stop and take a deep breath.
Yeah. The last question I have for you is a question called 3 Things, where I always ask my guests, what are 3 things that a new nurse should remember, and what are 3 things they can just forget?
Okay. Three things to forget. Forget your preconceived notions of what emergency nursing is.
Okay.
Forget your stereotypical views on who people are.
Okay.
In terms of the patients and what you already think they're going to be like. Forget your ego at the door.
Okay.
Be a genuine person. Be the kind person your patients need you to be.
Nice. I like that.
And 3 things to remember. Remember that we are all human and we all have errors. Remember that the bottom line of this profession is to care for people and their families and each other. Without each other, without care for one another, you will fail. You have to have empathy. And remember that this is a team. ERs, traumas, the different floors, the ICUs, everybody encompasses one team. And we need to remember that. That includes EMS and fire.
Yep,
we are all one team with the bottom line of taking care of the patient. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're our family. And yep. We can't do our job without somebody else doing theirs. There's a chain in everything. So remembering teamwork and family.
I like that. That's good. Well, that's all the questions I have for you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
This is going to be a good episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you.
Yes, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.
Potty training, Kevin.
Oh my gosh. Pee break.
That's exactly what's happening in here. I'm sorry.
That's hilarious.
There you go, baby. It's going to get any more mortifying. And, he never wants to do it. He never wants to use the bathroom. I have to fight with him every day, all day long.
That's funny. And he's like, now's a good time. Mom's on the phone. Now's a good time.
Now's a wonderful time. Absolutely.